Hi, welcome back to another episode of Nobody's Doing It Right, the podcast for those who are uncertain. My name is Kat. I'm your host. For today's episode, we're going to talk about how you shouldn't fall in love with your potential that you are projecting onto someone else. So what I mean by that is I think sometimes we'll stay in relationships. It could be romantic or platonic. This applies to any kind, really. But I think often, this is mostly what we think about when we think about romantic relationships. But we stick around because of someone's potential. We see potential in them. We see capability in them. We see them being able to be a certain version of themselves that is better, quote unquote, right? Whatever that means for you. It might be somebody who's more open, more vulnerable, more communicative, who can just do things in a way that would be beneficial for them and also help make the relationship work better. You might see that in a person, and that might be what keeps you there, despite what that person is showing you in the moment. And of course, the present moment is the only thing that exists. The past is done, the future is a fantasy. So to hold on to potential, you're basically trying to hold on to a future, a promise that hasn't actually been made, right? It's a promise that you have in your head of what you hope someone fulfills one day. But obviously that might not ever happen, right? It's expectation. And I think this is normal for everybody. We all do this to an extent, I think. Sometimes we lose sight of the present moment. We lose sight of what's actually going on. We don't focus on it enough. And we think, well, yeah, they're like this now, but, with some time, maybe I can do this a little bit more. I can help them do this. I can, change myself a little bit to make it work better. Like, there's so many things that you think you might be able to do to help this person meet the potential that you see in them. But I think that one thing we actually don't realize we might be doing is that we are falling in love not with their potential, but with the potential we see in ourselves that we then project onto them, that we will also want to see in them. And I think we do this a lot, especially those of us who feel like when we want to connect with people, we might want to see ourselves in a lot of them, right? We want to see ourselves, we feel comfortable with people who are like us. And of course, this won't resonate with everybody. I think the people that experience this will get it, but we might just want to always be around people that mirror us in some way. And I think to an extent, this is normal for everybody, right? But those of us who feel more comfortable with people that are just like us, we feel safer around them. We want to see ourselves in them. We might be projecting our own potential, the potential we see in ourselves, onto them. You are a different person. They are a different person. You are not them. They are not you. You cannot be exactly each other, right? So to see yourself, see what you're capable of, see your own potential that you maybe fulfill or don't fulfill, whatever, but you see it in yourself. You're like, well, I could do this. Like, I could do that. I could do this. And you see your partner and you think, okay, well, they can do this too. They can meet the standard. They could meet this potential, but it might not actually be their potential. It might just be your potential. Your potential is different than their potential. It doesn't mean one is better or worse than the other. It is unique to each of you. So the potential you're seeing in them might not at all be the potential they actually have in them, in their journey, in their life, whatever. It might be your potential. And what's happening is you're falling in love with yourself, basically. You're falling in love with the version of you that you would want to be reflected in them. But it hasn't happened yet. You're falling in love with this future projection of yourself, of your ultimate self, that you want to see in this person. And if they were that kind of person, this ultimate projection of you, this future version of you, then of course the relationship that you ultimately want would work out because it's all a projection of your own mind, of your own self. It's a projection of your higher self, and the relationship would have to work in alignment with that. And I know this sounds almost kind of self-centered, but I think it's normal. And obviously I'm not a therapist. I mention this almost all the time. This is just what I've had to realize in myself. I've learned this a lot from my own experience and the things I do or the way I see relationships. Sometimes I have to catch myself. Is this actually who they are and who they can be? Or is this me? I'm seeing myself and I'm trying to reflect it into them so that we can get to this level of relationship or connection or friendship, whatever, that would fulfill this potential of my ideal life, my ideal self. They cannot be forced into that for you. And you can't be forced into that for them either, right? That pressure, if they were to put that on you, wouldn't feel good either. Because you're like, well, that's not me. That's not who I want to be. That's not how I can show up. Because everybody has different capabilities. So the way you can show up, the potential you have, might not at all be the potential they have. They might not be able to show up in the same way. And I think then the first instinct will be to say, well, if they wanted to, they would. And this is why I dislike this narrative so much, because it's not always about that. And sometimes the things that people don't want to do are not a reflection of whether or not you're worthy of being shown up for in this way. It's a reflection of whether or not it's aligned for them. And something might not be aligned for them and might not have anything to do with the worth or value of the thing that's not aligned with them, even if that thing is you. I know this is hard to accept. It is painful. There's a lot of grief involved in this. I think this is the crux of what makes relationships very painful at times when they end because of this, right? Because of this feeling of they're not showing up in the way I need them to because they don't want to, or if they want to, they would, or I'm not worthy of it. It's not that, right? Like, we really need to take a step back and look at it all objectively and realize that you might be wanting someone to show up for you in the way that you need you to show up for you. So it is really important when this happens, or if you notice this happening and someone's not showing up for you in a certain way and it's really painful for you and it's making you question your worth, to ask yourself, okay, am I showing up for me the way I need to show up for me? Or am I looking for somebody else to show up for me in the way that I'm not showing up for me? Or maybe you are showing up for yourself that way. You show up for yourself that way all the time and you're very proud of that for yourself. Great. That's amazing. And then if that's happening, ask yourself, is that person not showing up for me? Or am I just wanting them to show up for me exactly the way I show up for me? Because that's a different thing too. And obviously that's not possible. Everyone's going to show up the way they can show up and they want to show up. And again, if they want to show up a different way, don't make that a reason for you to question your worth and value, because you want to show up in certain ways because they're aligned with you and your values and your morals and your ethics, whatever. And it isn't always a reflection, maybe not ever a reflection of somebody else's value and worth. It's just like, that's not me. That's not how I want to show up in a relationship. That's not how I want to do things. Right? So we have to be mindful of that so that we don't chip away at our self-worth. We don't make ourselves hate ourselves for no reason. Or we don't always villainize somebody who doesn't necessarily deserve it. Right? And sometimes people do. Like, sometimes people do awful things and they might be malicious and they might be hateful. And like, that's fair. That's valid to hold them accountable for that. And sometimes people might not be. Sometimes people might just be acting as they are. And it is our responsibility as well to be mindful of that in the moment, not to be holding on to the potential of it and then being disappointed when they show us who they actually are, but to be mindful of it every step of the way and say, oh, okay, I'm seeing this sign here that they're showing up in a way that's not aligned with what I need and what I want. So now I have to decide if I'm going to let this connection go, or am I going to hold on to the potential that I see in them, or the potential that I would have in myself that I would want to see in them. It's really important, because if you choose the latter, of course, you're going to stay longer in something that doesn't fulfill you. You're going to always then have even more expectations on this person to finally satisfy what you've been looking for, that you've been accommodating this relationship for, right? You've been overstepping your boundaries, neglecting your needs in the hopes that they will one day fulfill them, satisfy them. And if they don't, because they can't, or it's just not for them to want to do, it's not in their alignment to do so, you're always going to be resentful. And not only of them, but of yourself as well. So it is really important to ask yourself in these moments, okay, what potential am I really holding on to here? And is this potential that I'm holding on to masking how incompatible and unaligned we actually are for each other? Is the fantasy of the potential more alluring than the reality of the relationship? If that is the case, then you have to really ask yourself, am I going to do this for the rest of my life? Like, is this actually worth it for me? And what if this person can never be what I need them to be? Not because I'm not worthy of it, not because if they wanted to, they would, and they don't want to because I'm awful, but because they can't, and it's just not who they are, and that's all the information you need. They just aren't that person. Am I going to spend my life hoping and willing them and wishing that they would be? Ultimately, I think that would just end up making you lose trust with yourself if you stay in a dynamic like that. Again, it could be romantic, it could be platonic, whatever. It will make you lose trust with yourself, because if you hold yourself in a position like that and force yourself to stick it out, despite how uncomfortable it might be and unaligned it might be, you're not going to trust yourself, because you're going to think, well, look, I forced myself into a position that was so wrong for me. How can I trust myself to make better decisions later on? I can't. So then you'll end up making the same kind of wrong decisions, potentially, right? And of course, this is just my own experience, things I've learned from my own time in therapy. And it might not resonate with everybody, but I think those of you who are listening who get it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And hopefully this gives you some perspective. It gives you something to think about, to journal about if necessary. And if you want to talk about it with me, I offer one-to-one calls. You can book on my website. I have a Substack where I write about topics like these as well. And you can follow my other social media accounts for the rest of my content. But other than that, thank you for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.